Once upon a time, there was a king who ruled over a large island in the northern sea. The king loved money and power, and he loved to show off his wealth in front of his rich friends and noblemen of the kingdom. He held extravagant parties, but they were never big enough or exciting enough to fit his taste. He wanted more. He needed more. Since it was a secluded island, there were no countries he could invade or conquer. So he laid down heavy laws on his people. He demanded that once a year everyone must come to the palace and give the king half of their money, half of their food, half of their livestock, half of everything. So the king became richer and richer, and the people became poorer and poorer. On the far side of the island, there was a very small village. The people who lived in this village were very poor, for the king had taken almost everything they had. In this village lived Alexia, a poor peasant girl. She had a vivid imagination and rich love for words and stories. No matter how poor her family was, she could always cheer everyone around her with her colorful stories of truth, beauty, and love. "Alexia, Alexia," her mother called out one day. "It's time. We must travel to the palace to pay the king our dues." "Coming, mother," Alexia sang out. Though the journey was a hardship for her parents, Alexia, too young to understand, was looking forward to the trip as an adventure. She loved seeing new places and making new friends. Alexia could hardly go anywhere without making a new friend or two. Her innocence and goodness made her practically glow. During the entire trip to the palace, Alexia continuously wove together many whimsical tales and songs for herself and her parents to enjoy. Once they arrived at the palace, all were downcast and grim. Everyone stood in long, never-ending lines before the king, so they could turn their scant hard work for possessions over to him. Their drab-colored clothes and shoulders and hats were in stark contrast to the king, decked from head to toe in the finest silks and precious stones. Gold and silver shone like a diamond in the rough. Except for Alexia, everyone's attention was focused on the powerful king. Alexia, seemingly in another world, gushing over the elegance of buildings, furniture, and statues. She had so many questions about life in a palace, and there were so many people around her to talk to. Her mother tried to quiet her, but it was no use. Her energy, excitement, giggles, and songs stood out sharply against the dismal scene. To her parents' dismay, she began to attract a crowd. The straight lines began to shift. Heads moved side to side, trying to see where the excitement was coming from. Frowns slowly turned to smiles. Sighs turned into chuckles. Whispers turned into conversations, and chuckles turned into laughter and cheers. Her parents couldn't help but smile and be proud of their little girl, who had brought the gift of happiness to others. The king responded to this sound. "Oh, my lovely people are finally beginning to show their awe and love for me. Just my very presence before them is making them cheer," he gloated. "It's about time." But when he glanced down at his people, he saw they were not looking at him. No! They were looking at... what was it? Who was it? He could not see. "Guard!" he summoned. "What is going on?" The guard, who happened to be enjoying the merriment, quickly wiped the smile off his face and reported, "It's a young peasant girl, Your Majesty. She's telling wonderful stories and singing funny songs." "What?" he screeched. "My people! My people," he emphasized, "are more interested in a little girl's stories and songs than me? Well, enough! Enough!" The entire kingdom froze trembling, and they turned toward the king.
I pass a new law. I decree, I sentence that from this moment hence, no one except myself are allowed to speak or sing. All words are hereby banned. Anyone caught talking or singing or reading or writing words will be arrested and locked in my dungeons. That is the last word on this subject. His voice shook the walls and his echo rattled on and on until it faded out. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in her life, even Alexia didn't know what to say. Everyone hurried to their homes. Surely the king didn't really mean this, they all thought in silence. It was an outburst of anger. He will withdraw the sentence. But he did not. The very next day, the king sent out his entire army to search every home in the kingdom and remove every book. At the marketplace, a woman, without thinking, asked the grocer for 3 melons. She was arrested by the king's guards and never seen again. That's when everyone realized just how serious the king was. The good people of the kingdom obeyed their king. The months turned into years, and words were slowly forgotten. Without songs to cheer the farmers as they toiled, they became angry and began to resent their work. Without the kind words and wishes between the friends, the people grew lonely and cold. Without jokes and stories to entertain the people, their lips curled down into perpetual frowns. The universal language became one of tears. As crying was the only way to express their emotions, and their only emotion was sadness and grief, everyone was miserable. Everyone, including Alexia. But, unlike everyone else, Alexia couldn't help but remember words. Though she was silent on the outside, her mind was racing with stories and song lyrics and words and jokes and riddles and rhymes, and if she didn't say something soon, she feared she would burst. Spontaneous combustion is a paralyzing fear for an 8-year-old girl. The king was miserable as well. His grand parties lost any sense of fun. The king would give long speeches and tell royal jokes and riddles, but no one could answer. The king's parties were quiet, dull, and downright boring. The king's noblemen and friends eventually stopped bothering to come to the parties. The king's royal guards were only able to answer his commands with gestures. Eventually, the king succumbed to gesturing as well. He gave up speaking altogether. Alexia sat on the ground, hopeless, afraid, lonely, bored to tears, and all cried out. Then it happened. An idea darted across her void mind. Some think it was a crazy idea, others a brave idea, and that it was. No one else in the kingdom had the guts to do it. Alexia made up her mind. She could hold it in no longer. She started to write words down and hide them in any secret place she could find. When no one was looking, she would write a word on a leaf or a rock. She wrote short words like it and be, long words, eventually, funny words like kerfuffle, descriptive words, sweet, anything that came to her mind, anything she could remember. There was a wise old hermit who lived deep in the forest. He used to be a renowned professor. When all of his books were taken from him, he went to hiding and lived in the life of a grumpy old bear. He chanced upon one of Alexia's words. It shook and awoke him from the dismal, colorless life he was content with living. Like a dream, he blinked. Words. He had loved them so, but had forgotten them all the same. He searched for more. He collected all he could, and as his memory received, he wrote more words of his own. Why? How? He scolded himself. How could I have let this happen without a fight? And he began to contrive a plan of his own.
Next day, the word remember was found carved into a large rock on the riverbank. Every villager who came to draw water couldn't help but see it, and they remembered words. The day after that, a row of stones lined the main road leading into town. They said, "We've put up with this nonsense for too long." This was true. The villagers knew it. How could they have been so weak and fearful? Words and messages began to be passed down from house to house and village to village. "What can we do? Fear not. Together we can be strong. Fight for our rights. Confront the king." At the marketplace, hidden amid the vegetables, were the words. "The palace tomorrow, daybreak, pass along." The next day, when the first rays of sun peeked over the horizon, the people of the kingdom descended on the palace. With the wise old hermit leading the way, they forced their way into the king's courtroom. They stared at the king. He glared back at them in rage. A few moments of palpable silence, and then the people chose words as their weapon of choice and fired them at the king, lashing out their anger and frustration, sorrow, agony. But the king, used to such insults and familiar with such hateful words, hardly flinched. He was almost as glad they were suffering as he was. He smirked. A public hanging would be a pleasant diversion from his normal solitude and boredom. It wasn't working. The villagers could see that. Was it hopeless? But then something small began to push its way through the crowd. That something was a someone. Alexia? She made her way to the front and stood between the villagers and the king. She was armed with words, but these were different. With cool confidence, they slipped off her tongue with the calculated skills of a marksman. They hit her target. He reeled, he tottered, and at last struck his very core. He took it in his hands. He held it. He looked up at his attacker's face and saw not anger or disgust, but Alexia's hopeful eyes. Her sweet face ripped his insides in two. He grasped the silence and broke it. "I'm so sorry. I've been so unkind. I've been an unruly ruler. Forgive me. I retract my sentence. From now on, words shall be cherished and cultivated. They shall be used thoughtfully and for the good of all." Shouts for joy and exclamations crescendoed to a mighty roar that echoed through the entire kingdom. Everyone was having so much fun. The sound did not subside for 2 days and 2 nights. Everyone was too overjoyed to think of sleeping. In the end, the king found himself with an entire kingdom full of friends. Alexia would become his closest and dearest friend, and he named her as his royal advisor. The tale of what happened spread far and wide and was passed down for years to come. The end.